The call came in at 5:45 p.m. A frantic mother, bloodied and barely coherent, was screaming into the receiver, trying to describe what had just unfolded in her San Goes home. Her daughter was gone kidnapped by an armed man who had broken into their home and assaulted her family. I was assigned to lead the case. My name is Heather Randall, detective with the San Jose Police Department, and this was going to be one of the most critical investigations of my career. When I arrived at the scene, the chaos was palpable. Officers were trying to secure the area while paramedics attended to the mother and her teenage son. The garage floor was slick with blood, a wrenching sight that confirmed the violence of the confrontation. The mother, Rosalia, clutched at her son Paul, refusing to leave his side despite her own injuries. Their terror-filled eyes locked on me as I approached. "She's gone," Rosalia whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the sound of sirens and shouted orders. "Who's gone?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Jeanette." He took Jeanette. Rosalia struggled to describe the man who had invaded their home. He was large, she said, with wild eyes and a cruel demeanor. He'd used a screwdriver to subdue her son and struck her repeatedly with a frying pan before dragging Jeanette away. Her voice cracked as she spoke, tears streaking her blood-smeared face. The crime scene offered few immediate clues. The garage was in disarray, with overturned tools and a pool of blood staining the concrete floor. Inside the house, broken glass littered the floor from a smashed window. The phone lines had been severed, cutting off any chance Jeanette might have had to call for help. Her bedroom was ransacked, and there were signs of a violent struggle. My first move was to call in the forensics team. If we were going to find Jeanette, every second counted. The team began collecting samples and photographing the scene while I took stock of what little we had. There was no vehicle description, no license plate, and no clear direction of travel. All we had were the desperate accounts of Rosalia and Paul, who had fought valiantly to protect their family. I turned to Paul, who was sitting on the edge of an ambulance, holding an ice pack to his swollen face. "Tell me everything you remember," I said. He hesitated, his eyes darting to his mother as if seeking permission. Finally, he spoke. "I got home and saw the garage door open a few inches. I crawled under it and saw her in the car, tied up. She told me to run, but I couldn't leave her. I grabbed a screwdriver and tried to stop him." Paul's voice broke as he recounted how the man had overpowered him, disarmed him, and dragged him inside. His fists clenched as he described the brutal blows the man delivered to his mother. He said he was going to kill us. I thought he had when he drove off with Jeanette. I thought he'd killed her. The urgency of the situation was clear. I needed to act fast. I sent out an alert to neighboring jurisdictions and contacted our media liaison to begin circulating Jeanette's description. Within hours, her face was on every news station in the area. Helicopters equipped with loudspeakers flew over San Jose, broadcasting her name and description. Back at the precinct, we pored over the evidence. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's driveway camera showed a vehicle pulling into Jeanette's garage, but the video quality was poor, and the license plate was unreadable. The timestamp confirmed the timeline Rosalia and Paul had given. The man had broken in before Jeanette arrived home from school, waited for her, and abducted her after a prolonged assault. I replayed the footage, searching for any detail that could give us an edge. The vehicle's make and model were difficult to determine, but the unique dent on the rear bumper caught my eye. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but it was something. As the hours ticked by, the weight of the situation pressed down on me. The statistics were grim. The longer a child remained missing, the slimmer their chances of survival. But there was something about this case, something about Jeanette's resilience and her family's determination that made me believe we could bring her home. By midnight, we had canvassed the neighborhood, distributed flyers, and followed up on every lead that came in. The community was mobilized, their eyes scanning the streets for any sign of Jeanette. Despite the overwhelming odds, I wasn't ready to give up. I looked at the photo of Jeanette taped to my desk. Her wide smile and innocent eyes stared back at me, a haunting reminder of the stakes. "Hold on, Jeanette," I whispered. "We're coming for you." By dawn, the atmosphere in the precinct was tense. The trail was cold, and we were chasing shadows. Jeanette's abduction had shaken the community, and every officer on the case was acutely aware of the stakes. But as the hours passed, the faintest glimmers of hope began to emerge. The first break came when the forensic team called in with preliminary findings from the crime scene. They'd found a partial fingerprint on a shard of broken glass near Jeanette's window. It wasn't much, but it was something. I forwarded it to our lab for immediate analysis while continuing to pore over the case files. Every detail mattered. Next, the surveillance footage from the neighbor's driveway was enhanced. Though the license plate remained indecipherable, the vehicle's make was identified: a mid-1990s sedan, dark green, with a noticeable dent in the rear bumper. A car like that wasn't common, and I knew we'd need to cast a wide net to find it. Our team split into two groups, one to focus on the vehicle, scouring DMV records and canvassing nearby auto shops for recent repairs, while the other dug deeper into Rosalia and Paul's statements. It was painstaking work, but time wasn't on our side. Meanwhile, tips from the public began to pour in, fueled by media coverage and the flyers blanketing San Jose. The hotline rang constantly with reports of potential sightings. Most were dead ends, panicked residents mistaking other children for Jeanette, but every lead was followed up, no matter how unlikely. Amid the chaos, Rosalia called the station, her voice trembling. "Please," she said, "I need to do something. I can't just sit here. Put me on the news, anything." She was right. Jeanette's family needed to be the face of this search. We arranged for Rosalia and Paul to give a public statement that afternoon, hoping their emotional plea might shake loose the critical piece of information we were missing. The press conference was gut-wrenching. Rosalia, bandages covering her face, clutched a framed photo of Jeanette as she spoke directly to the camera. "Whoever took my daughter, please bring her back. She's just a little girl. She doesn't deserve this." Beside her, Paul stood silently, his face swollen and bruised, but his resolve unwavering. Back in the precinct, I focused on another angle: Jeanette's possible whereabouts. A city as large as San Jose offered countless places to hide, but I had a feeling the suspect hadn't gone far. Kidnappers who acted impulsively often stuck to familiar areas. I pulled up maps, marking locations tied to other cases and cross-referencing them with reports of suspicious activity. One call stood out: a report from East Palo Alto about a man behaving erratically in a White House with a locked garage. A neighbor had heard what they described as muffled screaming 2 nights prior, but hadn't thought much of it until they saw Jeanette's photo on the news. The lead was promising, but without solid evidence, we couldn't act. I sent a patrol car to stake out the address while preparing for the possibility of a raid. While we waited for more intel, I decided to visit Rosalia and Paul in person. They were staying with relatives, trying to recover from their injuries while grappling with the unbearable uncertainty of Jeanette's fate. Rosalia met me at the door, her face pale and drawn. "Do you have any news?" she asked. "Not yet," I admitted, "but we're following every lead. I promise you we won't stop until we bring her home." Paul was in the living room, his hands balled into fists. "I should have done more," he muttered. "I should have stopped him." "You did everything you could," I told him. "You're the reason we have any leads at all. You fought for your sister, don't forget that." Before I left, Rosalia took my hand. "Please," she said. "Find her." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Back at the precinct, another call came in, this time from a pizza delivery worker who remembered a strange order placed from East Palo Alto. The caller had given a phone number, but the address seemed off, as if the man was trying to conceal his location. "Get me that number," I said, grabbing a notepad. The phone records led us to a burner cell purchased 2 weeks earlier. It wasn't much, but paired with the neighbor's report of screaming, it gave us enough for probable cause. By the time night fell, we were ready to act. The tactical team assembled, armed with a layout of the property based on Jeanette's descriptions. My heart pounded as we rolled toward the house in unmarked vans. This was it. I couldn't shake the image of Jeanette's photo from my mind, her bright smile, her innocent eyes. Somewhere out there, she was fighting to survive. It was up to us to bring her back. The house stood in eerie silence, shrouded by the night. The tactical team moved swiftly and quietly, surrounding the property. The lead officer signaled for everyone to halt. Inside, there were no visible lights, but that didn't mean it was empty. My radio buzzed faintly as the SWAT commander reported, "We've got movement in the attic. Stand by." Jeanette's detailed descriptions of the house had proven invaluable. Every corner, every door, and every stairwell had been committed to memory and shared with us during our debrief. It was surreal to think that a 9-year-old had the composure to recall such precise details, while enduring unimaginable trauma. I hoped that same resilience would keep her alive until we could reach her. "Breaching," the team leader whispered. The front door burst open in a controlled explosion, and officers swarmed in, their flashlights piercing the darkness. The house was a mess: discarded items, unwashed dishes, and a palpable sense of chaos. They moved methodically, checking each room while calling out, "Clear." The silence that followed each call tightened the knot in my stomach. Then, a muffled noise came from above. "Attic," someone shouted. The officers repositioned, their weapons trained on the ceiling as one of them yanked down the attic ladder. A low growl echoed a dog. They had unleashed a K-9 unit, which darted up the ladder with unmatched precision. The snarls turned into scuffles, followed by a shout of pain. Moments later, they dragged him down. David Montiel Cruz, the suspect, his arms bloodied from the dog's bites. He spat curses at the officers, thrashing in defiance. My heart was pounding, but I had one question racing through my mind. Where was Jeanette? The officers resumed their sweep. Basement clear, second floor clear, but no one had seen her yet. I pushed forward, stepping inside as the team continued their search. "Here," someone called out from the second floor. I ran toward the voice, finding an officer standing at the foot of the bed. Beneath it, a pizza box had been carefully wedged out of sight. The officer lifted it, revealing the contents: evidence that only a brave and resourceful girl could have collected: a watch, a clay turtle, and even her underwear. My hands clenched into fists. Jeanette had been here. Then came the sound that would haunt me for days: a faint whimper. "Check the closet," I barked. An officer pulled the door open, and there she was, Jeanette, curled into a corner, her small frame trembling. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes shone with a fierce determination. I knelt down, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jeanette, it's okay. You're safe now." She hesitated, her hands clutching at her knees. Then, slowly, she extended her arms toward me. I wrapped her in a blanket as gently as I could, lifting her up and carrying her out of the room. She buried her face in my shoulder, whispering, "I didn't think anyone would find me." "We'll always find you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. As we carried Jeanette out, her family was already en route to the hospital, where they would soon be reunited. Her bravery had saved her life, and the evidence she gathered would ensure her captor faced justice. But as I looked into her eyes, I knew the scars of this ordeal would take far longer to heal. As we transported Jeanette to the hospital, the weight of the situation became heavier with every passing moment. Her small frame trembled in my arms, but her resolve was remarkable. Her whispers told a story that only deepened our resolve to see justice served. This wasn't just a case, it was a battle for the soul of an innocent child who had faced the worst of humanity. At the hospital, doctors moved quickly, checking for physical injuries and addressing her immediate needs. Jeanette clung to me until a nurse gently coaxed her into an examination room. It was only when she saw her mother and brother, battered but alive, that she finally broke down. Rosalia, still healing from her injuries, wrapped her arms around Jeanette, tears streaming down her swollen face. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You're safe." The reunion was brief, as the team needed Jeanette's account to complete our puzzle. We knew she was exhausted, but every detail she could provide was critical. Sitting across from her in a quiet room, I watched her small hands tremble as she clutched the blanket around her shoulders. I leaned in carefully, lowering my voice. "Jeanette, we're going to make sure he never hurts anyone again. Can you help us?" Her nod was hesitant but determined. Over the next hour, she recounted everything: how she memorized the turns the car took, the numbers she had heard, and the items she had hidden. Her recollection was astonishing, a testament to her courage and clarity under unimaginable pressure. She drew a detailed map of the house where she had been held captive. Every room, every detail: the position of the bed, the locked door, the shower where she had clung to brief moments of safety. She described the man's habits, how he paced when nervous, the sound of his voice when angry, and his moments of unsettling calm. Each word painted a clearer picture of a predator who had underestimated the strength of a 9-year-old. When she mentioned the pizza box, my breath caught. "Jeanette, the items you hid, are they still there?" She nodded, her eyes wide. "Under the bed." I knew we had something monumental. Her quick thinking had preserved critical evidence that could tie Cruz to the crimes beyond any doubt. With the address and map she provided, we launched a tactical operation. The SWAT team raided the property as Jeanette had described, finding Cruz still attempting to hide in the attic. The evidence under the bed was untouched, just as Jeanette had said. It was surreal to see how meticulously she had planned her escape and safeguarded the items that would ultimately convict him. Back at the station, we pieced together the final details of the case. Cruz had a history of violence, but his record didn't fully reveal the depths of his depravity. Jeanette's testimony painted a chilling portrait of a man who sought power through control and fear but was undone by the resilience of a child. The trial was swift and decisive. Jeanette's evidence, combined with the physical proof we recovered, left no room for doubt. Cruz was sentenced to life in prison, his attempts to manipulate the narrative collapsing under the weight of Jeanette's bravery and our investigation. He would never harm another child again. Yet, as satisfying as the verdict was, it was impossible to ignore the toll the ordeal had taken. Jeanette's family struggled to piece their lives back together. Rosalia carried the scars of that violent day, not just on her body but in her heart. Paul, though a hero in his own right, wrestled with the guilt of being unable to stop the abduction. And Jeanette, she faced the longest road of all. In the months that followed, I often thought about her. Her strength and intelligence had saved her life, but the emotional scars would take time to heal. When I visited her a year later, she had begun to find her footing again. Therapy had helped her process the trauma, and her family had become an unshakable support system. She even spoke about wanting to become a detective one day, inspired by the investigation that had brought her home. "You were so brave, Jeanette," I told her during one of our visits. She looked up at me with those same determined eyes and said, "I just wanted to see my family again. I knew I had to fight." Her words stayed with me. They reminded me why I do this job. It wasn't just about solving crimes, it was about giving people like Jeanette the chance to reclaim their lives, to rise above the horrors they had endured, and to find strength they never knew they had. Jeanette's courage had shattered the darkness that tried to consume her. It was a light that would guide her, and all of us, forward. The arrest of David Montiel Cruz marked the end of one chapter, but for Jeanette and her family, it was only the beginning of their long journey toward healing. The courtroom proceedings, while swift and just, forced them to relive every harrowing detail of those 3 days. Each testimony, each piece of evidence, painted a clearer picture of the cruelty they had endured. Jeanette's bravery became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Her collected evidence, the map she had drawn, and her articulate testimony not only solidified Cruz's guilt, but also highlighted her extraordinary courage. When she walked into the courtroom to testify, her presence was magnetic. She was no longer just a victim, she was the key to her own survival, a symbol of resilience that left everyone in the room in awe. The trial concluded with a life sentence for Cruz, ensuring he would never harm another person again. But as the courtroom emptied and the reporters dispersed, the weight of their new reality settled on Jeanette's family. Justice had been served, but the emotional wounds remained raw. In the months that followed, the Tamayo household became a fortress of quiet determination. Rosalia and Paul bore visible scars from their encounter with Cruz, but it was the emotional healing that proved most difficult. Rosalia blamed herself, often repeating, "I should have protected her." Despite reassurance from friends and family, the guilt lingered. Paul, once so brave in his attempt to defend his sister, wrestled with the trauma of that day. His quiet demeanor became even more reserved, his once vibrant energy dimmed by the memories he couldn't escape. Jeanette, however, faced the steepest climb. For weeks after her return, she avoided leaving the house, her once bold spirit dampened by a newfound fear of the outside world. Strangers seemed like threats, and even familiar places felt suffocating. Therapy became her lifeline. She began meeting regularly with a counselor who specialized in trauma, slowly untangling the complex emotions that had consumed her since her abduction. At first, the sessions were fraught with silence and tears. But over time, Jeanette found her voice again. She spoke about the strategy she had used to survive, the moments of terror when she thought she wouldn't make it, and the overwhelming relief of seeing her family again. Her counselor marveled at her resilience, often reminding her that she had done everything right in the face of unimaginable circumstances. Meanwhile, the case itself left a profound impact on the community and law enforcement. Jeanette's story became a rallying cry for stronger protections for children, prompting statewide reviews of Amber Alert protocols. Detective Heather Randall, deeply moved by Jeanette's bravery, worked tirelessly to ensure her story reached policymakers. She pushed for changes that would allow law enforcement to issue alerts more quickly and include broader criteria for missing children cases. The local police department also implemented changes. They organized workshops for families on safety and emergency preparedness, many of which Jeanette's family attended. Seeing the Tamayos participate, especially Jeanette, inspired countless others. It was clear her survival had given the community a reason to believe in hope, even during the darkest times. Jeanette's story also drew attention from national media. Offers for interviews poured in, but the family chose their appearances carefully. They wanted to focus on spreading awareness rather than sensationalizing their ordeal. Jeanette, despite her initial hesitation, agreed to appear on a special segment highlighting her bravery. Her calm yet powerful recounting of events left viewers across the country inspired. As the years passed, Jeanette began to reclaim her life. At 15, she took a bold step forward by enrolling in self-defense classes. Each session was a battle against her fears, but she found strength in every punch, kick, and technique she mastered. The skills didn't just give her physical confidence, they also restored a sense of control over her life. Her interest in law enforcement grew stronger with each passing year. Inspired by Detective Randall, Jeanette began studying criminal justice in college, determined to become a voice for the missing and the abused. She often credited Randall as her inspiration, saying, "She believed in me when I didn't know how to believe in myself." By the time Jeanette turned 21, she had become a beacon of hope for survivors. She spoke at events, sharing her story to encourage others to find their inner strength. "We all have a story," she often said, "but it doesn't have to define us. It can empower us." In the Tamayo household, the bonds between family members became stronger than ever. Rosalia and Paul found solace in seeing Jeanette thrive, their own healing mirroring her progress. They transformed their home into a sanctuary of love and resilience, a place where Jeanette could always find comfort and support. Jeanette's story also inspired policy changes on a broader scale. Her name became synonymous with survival, courage, and the importance of systemic improvements to protect vulnerable individuals. Across the state, new programs were launched to educate children and families about safety, while law enforcement agencies adopted Jeanette's strategies, memorizing details, collecting evidence as part of their training. In the quiet moments, though, Jeanette still grappled with the memories. She often thought about the little clay turtle she had taken from Cruz's house. It sat on her desk, a reminder of the darkest days of her life and the strength it had taken to emerge from them. To her, it wasn't just a memento, it was a symbol of her resilience, a tangible representation of the hope and determination that had carried her through. Her message to the world was clear, even in the face of unspeakable horrors. It's possible to fight, to endure, and to rise above. Jeanette had turned her fear into courage, her pain into purpose. And though the scars of her past would always remain, they served as a testament to her unyielding strength, a strength that would continue to inspire others for generations to come.